The morning sun cast long shadows across the Texas frontier as Sarah Mackenzie lifted the heavy wooden bucket from beside their small cabin. Her calloused hands, aged beyond her 17 years, gripped the rope handle with practiced ease. The trek to Miller's Creek would take her nearly 2 hours round trip, but her mother needed fresh water, and the well they had dug last spring had run dry 3 weeks ago. Inside the cabin, Mary Mackenzie lay propped against thin pillows, her once robust frame now nothing more than bones draped in pale skin. The fever had taken hold 6 months ago, and despite Sarah's desperate attempts with every remedy she knew, her mother continued to waste away. The nearest doctor was in San Antonio, 3 days hard ride through dangerous territory, and they had no money for his services even if she could make the journey. "I'll be back before noon, Mama," Sarah whispered, though she wasn't certain her mother could hear her anymore. Mary's breathing had become shallow and irregular, each breath a small miracle that might be her last. Sarah stepped outside into the crisp October air, the bucket swinging gently at her side. Their homestead sat in a small valley, surrounded by rolling hills dotted with mesquite and live oak trees. When her father had chosen this spot 5 years ago, it seemed perfect, sheltered from the worst winds, with good soil for farming and plenty of game nearby. But James Mackenzie had been killed in a Comanche raid 2 winters past, leaving Sarah and her mother to survive on their own in this harsh land. The path to Miller's Creek wound through thick brush and over rocky terrain that would challenge even experienced frontiersmen. Sarah had worn this trail smooth with her daily journeys, her feet finding purchase on stones her father had once helped her navigate. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that survival depended on being aware of every sound, every movement in the wilderness around her. As she walked, Sarah's mind wandered to the letters from her aunt in Philadelphia that arrived sporadically with traveling merchants. Aunt Elizabeth had begged them to come east, offering a home and prospects for marriage to a respectable young man. The idea of soft beds, regular meals, and safety behind city walls seemed like dreams from another world. But her mother had refused to abandon the land James had died protecting, and now it was too late for such journeys. The first mile passed without incident, marked only by the occasional call of a mockingbird or the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Sarah had learned to read the sounds of the wilderness like a book. When the forest fell silent, it usually meant predators were near, human or otherwise. Today, the natural symphony continued undisturbed, which should have been comforting. But something felt different. It was nothing she could name exactly, just a prickle at the base of her neck that suggested she was being watched. She paused beside a large boulder, pretending to adjust her grip on the bucket while scanning the landscape around her. Nothing moved except the gentle sway of grass in the breeze, yet the feeling persisted. Sarah had developed these instincts through hard necessity. Living alone on the frontier with a dying mother had taught her that paranoia often meant the difference between life and death. She resumed walking but kept her steps light and her ears attuned to any sound that didn't belong. The creek appeared ahead, its clear water dancing over smooth stones worn by countless years of flow. This was the dangerous part of her journey. Kneeling by the water's edge left her vulnerable, unable to run quickly if trouble appeared. She had positioned several large rocks around her usual spot, creating natural barriers that would force any approaching threat to come from predictable directions. Sarah knelt carefully and dipped the bucket into the cool water, watching it fill while maintaining awareness of her surroundings. The liquid was crystal clear and sweet, nothing like the brackish water from their failed well. Her mother had always said that good water could cure almost any ailment, though it seemed powerless against whatever was consuming her from within. As the bucket neared full, a twig snapped somewhere behind her. Sarah froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound had been deliberate, too heavy for a small animal, too purposeful for wind. She slowly turned her head without moving her body, using peripheral vision to scan the tree line. There, barely visible among the shadows of a massive oak tree, stood a figure. Even from a distance, she could see it was a man, tall and lean, with long dark hair and bronze skin. A Comanche warrior, though he wore no war paint and carried no visible weapons. He stood motionless as a statue, watching her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but Sarah forced herself to remain still. Sudden movements often triggered attacks, and She was too far from the creek bank to reach cover quickly. Instead, she carefully lifted the full bucket and rose to her feet, never taking her eyes off the distant figure. The warrior made no move to approach or retreat. He simply watched, his dark eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. Sarah had heard countless stories about Comanche raids, about women and children carried off into slavery or worse. But this man seemed different somehow, patient rather than aggressive, curious instead of hostile. She took a tentative step backward toward the path home. The warrior remained motionless. Another step, then another, until she was moving steadily away from the creek with the precious water sloshing in her bucket. Not once did she turn her back completely on the watching figure, though the awkward sideways gait made the journey treacherous. Only when the creek was well behind her did Sarah dare to look back. The warrior was gone, vanished as silently as he had appeared. She quickened her pace, though the heavy bucket made anything faster than a brisk walk impossible. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats now, every sound magnified by her heightened senses. The cabin came into view just as the sun reached its zenith, and Sarah felt overwhelming relief wash over her. She had completed another successful water run, though the encounter at the creek would haunt her thoughts. Should she tell her mother about the Comanche warrior? Mary was already weak and frightened about their situation. Adding the worry of hostile Indians might push her beyond what little strength remained. Sarah decided to keep the encounter to herself, at least for now. Inside the cabin, her mother appeared unchanged from the morning. Mary's skin had taken on a gray pallor that spoke of approaching death, though her eyes still held flickers of the strong woman who had helped build this homestead from nothing. Sarah poured fresh water into the ceramic pitcher beside the bed and offered her mother a drink from a wooden cup. "Thank you, dear one," Mary whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're such a good girl, taking care of your old mother like this." "You're not old, Mama. You're going to get better." The lie came easily after months of practice, though Sarah suspected they both knew the truth. Mary managed a weak smile. "Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become. Strong and capable, just like he always said you'd be." Sarah busied herself with small tasks around the cabin, checking their meager food supplies and adding wood to the fire. They had enough cornmeal and dried beans to last perhaps another week, after which she would need to make the dangerous trip to the trading post 15 miles away. The thought of leaving her mother alone for 2 days filled her with dread, but their survival depended on these periodic supply runs. As afternoon faded into evening, Sarah prepared a thin soup from their dwindling stores. Her mother managed only a few spoonfuls before exhaustion claimed her again. Sarah sat beside the bed, watching Mary's labored breathing and wondering how many more nights they would share together. Outside, coyotes began their evening chorus, their mournful calls echoing across the valley. Sarah had grown accustomed to their presence, even finding comfort in their predictable appearances. Tonight, though, their howl seemed more distant than usual, as if something had disturbed their normal hunting grounds. She banked the fire carefully, ensuring it would burn through the night without requiring attention. The cabin's single room felt both protective and confining, walls that kept out the wilderness but also trapped them with their fears and sorrows. Sarah spread her blanket on the floor beside her mother's bed, close enough to hear any change in Mary's breathing. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of bronze-skinned warriors and empty water buckets. Several times, Sarah woke convinced she had heard footsteps circling the cabin, but each investigation revealed nothing more threatening than settling logs or shifting wind. Dawn arrived gray and overcast, promising rain that would be both blessing and curse. Their water barrel could use refilling for natural precipitation, but storms often brought flash floods that could make the creek crossing treacherous. Sarah rose stiffly from her hard bed on the floor, noting that her mother seemed to be breathing easier this morning. "Good morning, Mama. How are you feeling?" Mary's eyes opened slowly, focusing with difficulty on her daughter's face. "Better, I think. That good water you brought yesterday seemed to help." Sarah felt a flutter of hope, though she tried not to let it show too strongly. Her mother had experienced brief improvements before, only to relapse into deeper weakness days later. Still, any respite from the relentless advance of illness was welcome. "I need to fetch more water today. The bucket's nearly empty again." Mary nodded weakly. "Be careful, dear one. I had strange dreams last night about Indians watching our cabin." Probably just an old woman's foolishness, but promise me you'll stay alert. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Could her mother somehow have sensed the warrior's presence yesterday? Or was it merely coincidence that her dreams had touched on Sarah's hidden encounter? I'll be extra careful, Mama. I always am. Sarah prepared for her journey with particular attention to detail this morning. She secured a small knife in her boot and tied her father's old hunting whistle around her neck, hidden beneath her dress. If trouble found her, the whistle's sharp blast might at least alert her mother to danger, though what Mary could do in her weakened state remained unclear. The path to Miller's Creek seemed longer today, weighed down by yesterday's encounter and her mother's ominous dreams. Sarah found herself pausing frequently to study the landscape, searching for any sign of the mysterious warrior. But the wilderness appeared empty of human presence, populated only by the usual collection of birds, squirrels, and other small creatures. The creek babbled cheerfully in the morning light, its surface broken by feeding fish and water striders skimming across the shallow pools. Sarah approached her usual spot with heightened caution, examining every tree and boulder before kneeling to fill her bucket. As the water rose in the wooden container, she became aware of a new sound, footsteps approaching through the dry grass behind her. This time, whoever was coming made no attempt at stealth. Sarah spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife in her boot. The same Comanche warrior from yesterday stood 20 feet away, his hands visible and empty of weapons. He was younger than she had thought, perhaps only a few years older than herself, with intelligent dark eyes and features that spoke more of curiosity than hostility. He wore simple buckskin clothing and carried a small leather pouch across one shoulder. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the morning stillness. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it, but she forced herself to remain upright and meet his gaze directly. Running would be useless. If he meant harm, she would never reach the tree line before he caught her. The warrior raised one hand slowly, palm forward, in what she recognized as a gesture of peace. Then he did something completely unexpected. He pointed toward her bucket, then toward the cabin's general direction, then placed his hand over his heart with an expression of what looked remarkably like concern. He was asking about her mother. Sarah blinked in surprise, uncertain how to respond. How could this stranger know about Mary's illness? Had he been watching their cabin for days or weeks, learning their routines and circumstances? The thought should have terrified her, but something in his manner suggested protective interest rather than predatory intent. Tentatively, Sarah pointed toward the cabin, then made a gesture of illness, hand to forehead, a weaving motion to indicate weakness. The warrior nodded gravely, then reached into his leather pouch and withdrew something wrapped in soft deerskin. He approached slowly, stopping just close enough to place the package on a flat rock between them before retreating to his original position. Then he pointed at the bundle, at Sarah, and toward the cabin again. His meaning was clear. This was medicine for her mother. Sarah stared at the offering in amazement. Why would a Comanche warrior, traditional enemy of white settlers, offer help to strangers? It made no sense according to everything she had been taught about Indian nature and intentions. But her mother was dying, and conventional medicine had failed completely. Sarah stepped forward carefully and unwrapped the deerskin bundle. Inside were dried roots and leaves she didn't recognize, along with what appeared to be bark from some tree unfamiliar to her. The herbs gave off a sharp, clean scent that reminded her of mountain air after rain. She looked up to find the warrior watching her intently. When their eyes met, he performed a series of gestures that seemed to indicate brewing the herbs into tea and giving it to the sick person. Then he pointed to himself, to his eyes, and toward the cabin. He would be watching to see if the medicine helped. Before Sarah could respond or ask questions, the warrior melted back into the forest with the silent grace that had marked his previous disappearance. She was left alone beside the creek, holding a bundle of mysterious herbs and wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter. The journey home passed in a blur of conflicted thoughts. Part of her insisted this was all an elaborate trap, that accepting medicine from a Comanche would somehow place her and her mother in greater danger. But another part, the part that had watched Mary waste away despite every conventional remedy, urged her to try anything that might offer hope. Back at the cabin, she found her mother in much the same condition as before, awake but weak, breathing with obvious effort. Sarah set the water bucket aside and studied the herb bundle, trying to decide whether to mention her encounter or simply brew the medicine without explanation. "What's it you have there, dear?" Sarah looked up to find her mother watching her with curious eyes that seemed clearer than they had been in weeks. I found some herbs by the creek, Mama. Plants I haven't seen before. I thought maybe I could brew them into tea for you." It wasn't entirely a lie, she reasoned. She had acquired the herbs near the creek, even if the circumstances were beyond anything she could rationally explain. Mary studied her daughter's face with the perception that serious illness sometimes brought. "There's something you're not telling me, child. I can see it in your eyes." Sarah sat heavily on the edge of the bed, still clutching the herb bundle. Her mother deserved honesty, especially if these might be among their final conversations together. "There was a man at the creek, Mama, a Comanche warrior. He gave me these herbs for you." She braced herself for fear, anger, or demands that they abandon the homestead immediately. Instead, Mary reached out with one trembling hand and touched the deerskin wrapping. "Did he seem hostile? Threatening?" "No, Mama. If anything, he seemed concerned about you, like he wanted to help." Mary was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the soft leather. "Your father used to tell me stories about Indians who helped lost travelers or warned settlers about dangers. He said not all tribes were the same, and not all warriors were enemies. Perhaps this man is one of the good ones." Sarah felt a surge of relief at her mother's calm acceptance. "Should I brew the tea? We don't know what these herbs might do." "Child, I'm dying whether we know it or not. If there's a chance this medicine could help, I'm willing to try. Besides, if this warrior meant us harm, he could have taken it already instead of offering help." Sarah built up the fire and set water to boil in their iron pot. The herbs gave off an increasingly strong aroma as the tea steeped, filling the cabin with scents that seemed both foreign and somehow familiar. When it was ready, she strained the liquid into a cup and helped her mother sit up to drink. Mary sipped the tea slowly, her expression thoughtful. "It tastes better than I expected. Not bitter like most medicines." Within an hour, something remarkable began to happen. Mary's breathing became easier, less labored. Color returned to her pale cheeks, and her eyes grew brighter. By evening, she was sitting up without assistance and had eaten more food than she had consumed in the previous 3 days combined. "I feel stronger, Sarah. Not completely well, but stronger than I have in months." Sarah could hardly believe the transformation. While she tried to remain cautious about false hope, her mother's improvement was undeniable. The mysterious herbs had accomplished what months of conventional remedies had failed to achieve. As night fell, Sarah found herself looking toward the cabin's single window, wondering if the warrior was somewhere in the darkness, watching to see if his medicine had helped. The thought should have been frightening, but instead she felt an odd sense of gratitude and protection. Tomorrow she would need to return to the creek for more water. Perhaps she would have a chance to thank her unlikely benefactor if he chose to appear again. For now, though, she was content to sit beside her mother's bed, listening to strong, steady breathing that spoke of renewed hope. Outside, the coyotes called as they did every night, but their voices seemed more distant than usual, as if something had changed the patterns of the wilderness around their small cabin. Sarah smiled quietly to herself as she settled down to sleep. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight her mother was better, and that was miracle enough for any one day. 3 days passed before Sarah encountered the warrior again, though she sensed his presence each time she made the journey to Miller's Creek. Her mother's improvement had been remarkable and sustained. Mary was now sitting up for hours at a time, eating regular meals, and even helping with small tasks around the cabin. The mysterious herbs had worked better than any medicine Sarah had ever seen. On the 4th morning, as autumn mist clung to the valley floor, Sarah found a second bundle wrapped in deerskin waiting on the same flat rock where the warrior had left his first offering. This package was smaller, but contained different herbs, along with what appeared to be carefully prepared strips of dried meat. A simple drawing scratched into the soft earth beside the rock showed a crescent moon, perhaps indicating when the new medicine should be given. Sarah looked around for any sign of the warrior, but saw nothing. Whoever he was, he moved like a ghost through these hills, appearing and vanishing at will while somehow monitoring her mother's condition. The thought of being watched so closely should have been terrifying, yet Sarah found herself feeling oddly protected rather than threatened. She wrapped the new bundle carefully and headed home, her steps lighter than they had been in months. The additional medicine suggested that her mysterious benefactor expected Mary's recovery to continue, which filled Sarah with hope she had barely dared to feel. "More herbs?" Mary asked when she saw the deerskin package. "Different ones this time, and some dried meat." Sarah showed her mother the strip of jerky, which was unlike anything she had seen before, dark and rich-smelling, seasoned with unfamiliar spices. Mary examined the meat thoughtfully. "This is pemmican, child. Indians make it from buffalo or deer, mixed with berries and fat. It can keep for months and provides great strength for traveling or illness." She looked up at her daughter with curious eyes. "Your warrior friend knows quite a bit about healing, doesn't he?" The tea from the new herbs tasted different from the first batch, earthier, with a slight sweetness that made it more pleasant to drink. Mary consumed it eagerly, and by evening she was walking around the cabin without assistance for the first time since the fever had taken hold. She even helped Sarah prepare their evening meal, standing at the fire to stir the pot, while humming an old song from her childhood in Missouri. "I feel like myself again," Mary said as they shared their simple supper. "Whatever the young man gave us, it's powerful medicine indeed." "Young man?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "How do you know he's young?" Mary smiled with a knowing look. "The way you describe him, dear one. And the care he's showing, watching over strangers, takes a kind heart that's usually found in younger folks. Older warriors might help if asked, but they wouldn't go out of their way to monitor someone else's recovery." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks and turned away to tend the fire. Her mother had always been perceptive about matters of the heart, even when Sarah herself wasn't sure what she was feeling. That night, she lay awake listening to her mother's peaceful breathing and wondering about the mysterious warrior. Who was he? Why was he helping them? And what did he expect in return for his kindness? In her experience, nothing in frontier life came without a price, though she couldn't imagine what payment a Comanche warrior might demand from two isolated women. Morning brought the first hard frost of autumn, coating the grass with silver crystals that crunched under Sarah's boots as she made her way toward the creek. The changing season reminded her that winter was approaching, a time of year that would bring new challenges to their survival. Their firewood supply was adequate, but not abundant, and their food stores remained dangerously low. Soon she would need to make the long journey to the trading post, leaving her mother alone for days. At the creek, Sarah found yet another surprise waiting for her. 3 rabbits, cleanly killed and already skinned, hung from a low branch near her usual filling spot. Beside them, another small bundle contained what appeared to be seeds wrapped in bark. The warrior was not only providing medicine for her mother, but ensuring they had sufficient food as well. Sarah looked around carefully before calling out in a voice barely above a whisper, "Thank you." She didn't expect an answer and didn't receive one, but somehow she felt her gratitude had been acknowledged. The rabbits would provide much-needed protein for her recovering mother, while the seeds could be planted next spring, assuming they survived the coming winter. As she knelt to fill her bucket, Sarah became aware of someone approaching through the trees. This time, the warrior made no attempt to remain hidden, walking openly through the dappled sunlight with the confidence of someone completely at ease in the wilderness. He was indeed young, she realized, probably no more than 25, with strong features and intelligent eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge beyond his years. He stopped a respectful distance away and gestured toward the rabbits, then toward her, his meaning clear. The gift was for her and her mother. Sarah nodded her thanks, then pointed to herself and said clearly, "Sarah." The warrior considered this for a moment, then placed his hand on his chest and said something in his own language that sounded like Ayana. When Sarah looked confused, he tried again in heavily accented English. "Running Wolf." "Running Wolf," Sarah repeated, testing the unfamiliar name. It suited him somehow. There was something of the wolf's silent strength and patient wisdom in his manner. Running Wolf gestured toward the herbs Sarah had used for her mother, then raised his eyebrows in a questioning expression. He wanted to know how Mary was responding to the treatment. Sarah smiled and made gestures indicating improvement, pointing toward the cabin, then miming someone sitting up, walking around, eating. Running Wolf's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine pleasure at the news. He nodded approvingly and made a gesture that seemed to indicate the medicine should continue. Then he did something unexpected. He pointed toward the approaching winter clouds gathering on the horizon, then toward Sarah's thin dress and worn boots, his expression becoming serious. He was concerned about their preparations for the cold season ahead. Sarah looked down at her inadequate clothing and felt a flush of embarrassment. Running Wolf was right to be concerned. She and her mother were poorly equipped for a harsh frontier winter. Their blankets were threadbare, their food supplies minimal, and their clothing insufficient for the bitter cold that would soon arrive. Running Wolf seemed to sense her distress. He made a series of gestures that appeared to indicate he would return with more help, then pointed toward the sun's position in the sky to suggest a specific time. Sarah interpreted this to mean he would come back later in the day. Before she could respond, he had vanished again into the forest, leaving her alone with the rabbits, seeds, and a growing sense of wonder at this strange friendship that was developing. A Comanche warrior was not only providing medicine for her mother, but apparently planning to help them survive the approaching winter. It went against everything she had been taught about Indian nature and intentions. Sarah gathered her unexpected gifts and headed home, her mind spinning with questions and possibilities. How could she explain fresh meat to her mother without revealing the extent of their mysterious benefactor's generosity? And what would Running Wolf want in return for his continued help? She found Mary sitting beside the cabin's single window, working on mending one of their few remaining blankets. The improvement in her mother's condition was remarkable. Her color was good, her breathing easy, and her movements showed returning strength. "You look thoughtful, dear one. Did something happen at the creek?" Sarah set down the water bucket and held up the rabbits. "I found these near the water. Someone had cleaned them and left them hanging." Mary's eyebrows rose. "Someone? Or a certain young warrior who seems to be watching out for us?" There was no point in pretending anymore. Sarah sat down beside her mother and told her about the morning's encounter, including Running Wolf's apparent concern about their winter preparations. "He seems like a good man," Mary said when Sarah finished her account. "But you should be careful, child. We don't understand his motivations yet, and accepting too much help might create obligations we can't fulfill." "What kind of obligations?" Mary was quiet for a moment, her fingers still working on the blanket. "Among Indian tribes, gifts often create bonds of debt and responsibility. He might expect something in return: protection, loyalty, even marriage rights. We need to be cautious about accepting too much without understanding his expectations." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The possibility that Running Wolf might view his help as a form of courtship had never occurred to her, though it made sense according to frontier customs she had heard about. Indian men sometimes try to claim white women as wives, though usually through force rather than kindness. "Should I stop accepting his gifts?" "Not necessarily," Mary said carefully, "but we should try to give something in return to keep the relationship balanced. Do we have anything that might be valuable to him?" Sarah considered their meager possessions. They owned little beyond basic tools, worn clothing, and a few precious items that had belonged to her father. Then she remembered something that might work. Papa's silver pocket watch, the one he brought from Illinois. Mary nodded slowly. "That might do. It's valuable, but not essential to our survival. And it might show Running Wolf that we understand the importance of reciprocal gifts." They prepared the rabbits for their midday meal, creating a feast more abundant than any they had enjoyed in months. The meat was tender and flavorful, providing nourishment that both women desperately needed. As they ate, Sarah found herself thinking about Running Wolf's kindness and wondering about his life among the Comanche. Late in the afternoon, as shadows began to lengthen across the valley, Sarah saw a figure approaching their cabin from the direction of the creek. Running Wolf walked openly across the meadow, carrying what appeared to be a large bundle across his shoulders. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who meant no harm, though Sarah noticed he kept his hands visible and empty of weapons. "He's coming here," Sarah breathed, watching through the window. Mary struggled to her feet, steadying herself against the wall. "Help me outside, dear. If he's bringing gifts to our home, the least we can do is greet him properly." They stepped out into the crisp afternoon air as Running Wolf approached to within 20 feet of the cabin. He set down his bundle and raised his hand in the same peaceful greeting Sarah had seen at the creek, then gestured toward the package at his feet. The bundle contained treasures beyond anything Sarah had imagined. Thick buffalo hides that would serve as warm blankets or winter clothing, dried corn, and beans that could feed them for months. A pair of well-made moccasins that would replace Sarah's failing boots. Most remarkably, there was a beautiful winter coat made from soft deer hide and lined with rabbit fur. Running Wolf gestured toward Mary, then toward the coat, making it clear the warm garment was intended for her. His expression showed genuine concern for an elderly woman facing winter in inadequate clothing. Mary stepped forward slowly and examined the coat with obvious appreciation. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with intricate beadwork decorating the collar and cuffs. It represented hours of skilled labor and was probably worth more than everything the Mackenzie women currently owned combined. "This is too valuable," Mary said, though she spoke in English that Running Wolf might not understand. "We can't accept something like this without proper payment." Sarah disappeared into the cabin and returned with her father's silver pocket watch. The timepiece had been James Mackenzie's most prized possession, a gift from his own father back in Illinois. It pained her to part with one of their few remaining connections to him, but her mother was right about the importance of reciprocal gifts. She held the watch out toward Running Wolf, opening it to show the intricate mechanism inside. His eyes widened with interest as he examined the unfamiliar device, turning it over to study the engraved silver case and listening to the steady ticking that marked the passage of time. Running Wolf looked from the watch to Sarah, then back to the gifts he had brought. He seemed to be calculating whether the trade was fair, his expression thoughtful and serious. Finally, he nodded and accepted the watch, tucking it carefully into his leather pouch. Then, he did something that surprised both women. He pointed toward the sun, now low on the western horizon, then made a series of gestures that seemed to indicate returning darkness and cold weather. Next, he pointed toward their cabin, then toward himself, and made a protective gesture that suggested watching or guarding. Mary and Sarah exchanged glances. Was Running Wolf offering to protect them through the coming winter? The implications were both comforting and concerning. Having a skilled warrior watching over their isolated homestead would certainly improve their chances of survival, but it would also create complicated obligations and dependencies. "What do you think he's asking?" Sarah whispered to her mother. "I think he's offering to help us survive the winter," Mary replied quietly. "The question is what he expects in return." Running Wolf seemed to sense their uncertainty. He made another series of gestures, pointing toward the hills around their valley, then holding up fingers to indicate multiple people, then making throat-cutting motions that clearly meant danger. He was warning them about hostile bands that might threaten isolated settlers during the harsh months ahead. The message was sobering. Sarah had heard stories about winter raids, when desperate war parties might attack homesteads for food and supplies. Two women alone would be easy targets for any group willing to risk winter travel for such prizes. Running Wolf pointed toward himself again, then made a gesture like someone keeping watch, followed by motions that seemed to indicate he would come and go rather than staying permanently. He was offering protection without demanding to move into their home, a compromise that preserved their independence while providing security. Mary stepped forward and nodded slowly, then gestured toward Running Wolf and toward their cabin in a way that seemed to indicate welcome. She was accepting his offer of protection while making it clear they understood the arrangement. Running Wolf smiled. The first time Sarah had seen him show such open pleasure. He gathered up the empty bundles from his gifts and prepared to leave, but before going, he pointed toward the creek, then toward Sarah, then held up two fingers. He would meet her at the usual place in 2 days. As he disappeared into the gathering dusk, Sarah and Mary carried their unexpected wealth into the cabin. The buffalo hides would keep them warm through even the coldest nights, while the additional food supplies meant they might not need to risk the dangerous journey to the trading post before spring. "I think we've just entered into an alliance," Mary said as she examined the beautiful winter coat more closely. "That young man is offering us something precious, the protection of a skilled warrior during our most vulnerable season. But what does he really want, Mama? Men don't usually go to such lengths without expecting something significant in return." Mary smiled gently. "Perhaps he simply recognizes that we need help, and he has help to give. Not everyone acts from selfish motives, dear one. Sometimes kindness is simply kindness." Sarah wanted to believe her mother's optimistic interpretation, but frontier life had taught her to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. Still, as she wrapped herself in the soft warmth of a buffalo hide that evening, she couldn't deny the profound relief of feeling truly warm for the first time in weeks. Outside, the first winter wind began to howl around their cabin, carrying the promise of hard months ahead. But inside, two women sat by their fire wearing clothes that would keep them alive through whatever cold the season might bring, protected by the mysterious kindness of a Comanche warrior who asked for nothing more than the chance to help them survive. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah found herself thinking about Running Wolf's gentle smile and wondering what drove a man to show such care for strangers. Tomorrow she would ask her mother more about Indian customs and courtship rituals. For tonight, though, she was content to rest in warmth and safety, guarded by someone whose motives she didn't fully understand but whose protection she had come to depend upon. The wind continued to blow through the darkness, but it no longer sounded like a threat. Instead, it seemed to carry promises of a winter that might be survived, and perhaps even of friendships that could bridge the vast cultural divide of the American frontier. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Sarah Mackenzie no longer felt like she was facing them alone. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the north with bitter winds that rattled the cabin walls and turned the world white with the first significant snowfall of the season. Sarah woke to find frost covering the inside of their single window, and when she stepped outside to check their water supply, her breath created clouds that hung in the still air like smoke. The buffalo hides Running Wolf had provided proved to be lifesavers. Without them, the Mackenzie women would have struggled desperately to stay warm in their poorly insulated cabin. Instead, they were comfortable even as temperatures plummeted far below what either had experienced in their previous years on the frontier. Mary's recovery continued to be remarkable. The mysterious herbs had not only halted her decline, but seemed to be restoring her strength daily. She was now able to help with all their household tasks, and had even begun planning improvements they could make to the cabin before the worst weather arrived. Her renewed vitality gave Sarah hope that they might not only survive this winter, but emerge from it stronger than before. On the morning Running Wolf was scheduled to meet her at the creek, Sarah bundled herself in the warm clothing he had provided and set out across the snow-covered landscape. The familiar path was transformed by winter, with landmarks obscured by drifts and new hazards created by ice-covered rocks and hidden obstacles. She moved carefully, testing each step and grateful for the warm moccasins that kept her feet dry and comfortable. The creek had partially frozen, leaving only a narrow channel of flowing water accessible for filling her bucket. Sarah approached the spot cautiously, aware that ice could be treacherous and that a fall into freezing water could prove fatal. She was concentrating on finding secure footing when she became aware of someone approaching through the snow behind her. Running Wolf appeared like a ghost against the white landscape, his movements so quiet that she wouldn't have detected him if he hadn't intentionally made himself visible. He wore heavy winter clothing that seemed to be made from the same materials as the garments he had given them, and he carried what appeared to be snowshoes slung across his shoulders. He gestured toward the partially frozen creek, then towards Sarah's bucket, his expression showing concern about the dangerous conditions. Then, he demonstrated something that amazed her. He approached the ice at a different angle and used a small hatchet to break through the frozen surface, creating a safe access point that wouldn't require her to venture onto uncertain footing. When she had filled her bucket with fresh water, Running Wolf made gestures indicating she should wait while he retrieved something from his pack. He produced another bundle wrapped in deerskin, this one containing what appeared to be dried fish and more of the medicinal herbs that had helped her mother so dramatically. But this time he included something else, a simple wooden flute carved with intricate designs that spoke of hours of patient craftsmanship. He held the instrument carefully and played a brief melody that seemed to capture the essence of winter wind singing through bare trees. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. When he finished playing, Running Wolf offered her the flute with a gesture that clearly indicated it was a gift for her personally rather than for her mother. Sarah accepted it with wonder, running her fingers over the smooth wood and marveling at the delicate patterns carved into its surface. "It's beautiful," she whispered, though she wasn't sure he would understand the words. Running Wolf seemed to comprehend her meaning despite the language barrier. He made a gesture that suggested playing the flute, then pointed toward their cabin, his meaning clear. She should take it home and learn to make her own music. Then he did something that changed everything between them. He reached into his pack and withdrew a pair of snowshoes sized perfectly for Sarah's feet. The frames were made from bent wood and sinew, with leather bindings that showed expert craftsmanship. He knelt in the snow and demonstrated how to attach them properly, then stood and made walking motions that showed how they would allow her to travel easily over deep drifts. The implications were staggering. With snowshoes, Sarah would no longer be trapped in their cabin when winter storms made the path to the creek impassable. She could hunt for small game, gather firewood from distant groves, and maintain their survival even in the worst weather. The gift represented freedom and independence rather than increased dependency. But more than that, the personal nature of the gift, something made specifically for her rather than for their general survival, suggested a deepening relationship that went beyond simple humanitarian aid. Running Wolf was no longer just helping two desperate women survive the winter. He was investing in a personal connection with Sarah herself. She looked up from examining the snowshoes to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. There was warmth in his dark eyes, but also patience, as if he were willing to wait for her to understand something important that couldn't be communicated through gestures alone. "Thank you," Sarah said, meeting his gaze directly. "For everything. For my mother's life, for keeping us warm, for all of it." Running Wolf nodded gravely, then did something that surprised her. He pointed toward the sun, now approaching its winter solstice position low in the southern sky, then made a circular motion that suggested the passage of seasons. Finally, he pointed toward himself, toward Sarah, then made a gesture that seemed to indicate some kind of future meeting or reunion. He was telling her that this arrangement would continue beyond winter, that whatever relationship was developing between them had long-term implications neither of them fully understood yet. Before Sarah could fully process this revelation, Running Wolf gathered his things and prepared to leave. But this time, instead of vanishing immediately into the forest, he walked with her partway back toward the cabin, his presence creating a sense of safety and companionship she hadn't experienced since her father's death. When they reached the edge of the meadow where their homestead sat, he stopped and pointed toward various locations around the valley. The rocky outcropping to the north, the dense grove of oak trees to the east, the narrow passage between hills to the south. Sarah realized he was showing her his watching posts, the places from which he monitored their safety without being seen. The knowledge that he had been protecting them from multiple vantage points was both comforting and somewhat overwhelming. Running Wolf had been devoting significant time and energy to ensuring their welfare, creating a network of surveillance around their isolated cabin that probably rivaled military installations she had heard about. As he prepared to leave, Running Wolf made one final gesture that sent heat flooding through Sarah's cheeks. He pointed toward her, then toward his heart, then toward the sky, his meaning unmistakable despite the lack of shared language. He was telling her that his feelings for her had grown beyond simple concern for her welfare. Sarah stood frozen in the snow, watching him disappear into the winter landscape, while her mind struggled to process everything that had just happened. Running Wolf wasn't simply a kind stranger helping them survive. He was a young man who had developed romantic feelings for her, and his gifts and protection were expressions of courtship according to his cultural traditions. The walk back to the cabin gave her time to think, though her thoughts remained confused and contradictory. Part of her felt panic at the idea of a Comanche warrior viewing her as a potential wife. Everything she had been taught suggested such relationships ended badly for white women. But another part of her couldn't forget his gentleness, his patience, or the way his smile had transformed his serious features into something warm and appealing. Mary was waiting by the window when Sarah returned, her improved health allowing her to watch for her daughter's safe return rather than lying helplessly in bed. She noticed the snowshoes immediately, along with Sarah's thoughtful expression. "He gave you those?" Mary asked, examining the expertly crafted snowshoes. "Yes, and this." Sarah showed her mother the wooden flute, playing a few hesitant notes that created sounds even more beautiful than she had expected. Mary's eyebrows rose as she took in the personal nature of these gifts. "Sarah, dear, I think that young man's intentions toward you are becoming quite serious." "I know, Mama. He made it clear today that his feelings have developed." Mary was quiet for a moment, studying her daughter's face. "What do you feel about that?" Sarah sank into their single chair, still holding the flute. "I don't know. Everything I've been taught says I should be terrified. Indians taking white women as wives. It never ends well in the stories we hear. But this isn't like the stories, is it?" Mary said gently. He's not taking you anywhere. He's helping us survive where we are, asking for nothing in return except the chance to protect us. That doesn't sound like the behavior of someone who means harm. But what about the cultural differences, Mama? How could a relationship like that possibly work? We don't even speak the same language. Mary smiled. Your father and I came from different worlds too, child. He was a city boy from Illinois, and I was raised on a farm in Missouri. We had to learn each other's ways, but love found a way to bridge those differences. Sarah considered this while absently fingering the flute's carved surface. Running Wolf had shown remarkable sensitivity to their needs and concerns, demonstrating a kind of emotional intelligence that suggested he might be capable of navigating cultural differences better than she had expected. What do you think I should do? I think you should be honest with yourself about your feelings, Mary replied. Do you feel attraction to him? Interest? Friendship? Fear? All those things together. Sarah thought about Running Wolf's quiet strength, his gentle hands when he demonstrated the snowshoes, the way his eyes lit up when he played the flute. She remembered the safety she felt in his presence, and the growing anticipation she experienced before their meetings at the creek. I think I might be developing feelings for him too, she admitted quietly. And that terrifies me. Mary moved to sit on the floor beside her daughter's chair. Why does it terrify you? Because if I care about him, I want to make him happy. And what if making him happy means leaving everything I know behind? What if he expects me to live with his people, to become Comanche myself? I don't know if I'm brave enough for that. Have you considered that he might be willing to adapt to your world instead? Look at everything he's done so far. He's the one who's been traveling to meet you, learning about your needs, providing for you according to white customs of care and protection. Maybe he's already choosing your world over his. This possibility hadn't occurred to Sarah, though it made sense given Running Wolf's behavior patterns. He had never suggested she come to him. Instead, he consistently came to her, adapting his approaches to what he perceived as her comfort level and cultural expectations. That evening, Sarah practiced with the flute while her mother worked on expanding one of their blankets using scraps of the buffalo hide. The instrument responded beautifully to her amateur attempts, producing sounds that filled their cabin with music neither woman had heard since James Mackenzie's death. He had played harmonica in the evenings, and the return of music to their home felt like a restoration of something precious that had been lost. As she played, Sarah found herself thinking about the complexity of human connection across cultural boundaries. Running Wolf had managed to communicate care, protection, and even romantic interest without sharing common language. His actions spoke more clearly than words could have, demonstrating character and intentions in ways that mere conversation never could. Over the following days, Sarah experimented with the snowshoes and found them to be revolutionary for winter travel. She could now move easily across deep drifts that would have been impassable in regular boots, opening up possibilities for hunting, foraging, and exploration that had been impossible before. The gift had truly provided freedom rather than creating obligation. She also began to understand the strategic value of Running Wolf's protection network. From the vantage points he had shown her, a single observer could monitor all the approaches to their valley while remaining hidden from potential threats. His surveillance system was both comprehensive and invisible, providing security without creating an oppressive sense of being watched. Most importantly, Sarah began to recognize the patience and respect Running Wolf had shown throughout their developing relationship. He could have approached their cabin directly, demanding shelter or gratitude for his help. Instead, he had allowed her to control the pace and terms of their interaction, never pushing beyond what she seemed ready to accept. A week passed before their next scheduled meeting at the creek. During that time, Sarah found herself looking forward to seeing him with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the practical benefits of his gifts. She wanted to see his smile, to watch him move through the winter landscape with his natural grace, to experience the sense of safety and partnership his presence provided. When the appointed day arrived, Sarah made her way to the creek with unusual care for her appearance. She had washed her hair despite the cold, braided it neatly, and worn her cleanest available clothing under the warm garments Running Wolf had provided. The effort felt both natural and slightly embarrassing. She was preparing for what was essentially a courtship meeting, whether she was ready to admit it or not. Running Wolf was waiting for her at their usual spot, but this time he had brought something extraordinary. A small fire burning in a ring of stones, with what appeared to be fresh fish cooking over the flames. The sight of him tending the fire like a domestic scene from some impossible dream made Sarah's heart skip in a way that answered her questions about her developing feelings. He looked up as she approached and smiled with obvious pleasure at seeing her. Then, he gestured toward the fire and the cooking fish, clearly inviting her to share a meal with him in the winter wilderness. It was perhaps the most romantic gesture anyone had ever made toward her, and the fact that it came from a man whose culture she barely understood only made it more remarkable. Sarah set down her water bucket and moved toward the warmth of the fire, drawn by more than just the promise of heat and food. She was being drawn toward something that might change her life forever, and for the first time since their encounters began, she found herself genuinely eager to discover what that might be. The shared meal by the creek marked a turning point in Sarah's relationship with Running Wolf. As they sat beside the small fire, eating fresh fish that tasted better than anything she could remember, he began to teach her words in his language while learning English words from her. Their communication became richer, though still limited, and Sarah found herself looking forward to these lessons almost as much as she treasured the practical help he continued to provide. Running Wolf's name for her sounded like music when he spoke it, something that meant winter flower in the Comanche tongue. In return, she taught him to say her name properly, watching his lips form the unfamiliar sounds with careful concentration that made her heart flutter in ways she was finally ready to acknowledge. During the week following their first shared meal, Sarah began to understand more about Running Wolf's background through their halting conversations. He was not a typical warrior, she learned. His mother had been captured as a child from a Mexican village and had taught him Spanish along with Comanche, which explained his facility with learning new languages. His father was a respected medicine man, which accounted for his knowledge of healing herbs and his understanding of illness. Most importantly, Running Wolf had chosen to live somewhat apart from his band during this period, pursuing what he called a vision quest, a spiritual journey that required solitude and contemplation in the wilderness. His protection of Sarah and her mother had become part of this quest, though he struggled to explain exactly how or why in their limited shared vocabulary. Mary continued to recover strength daily, and she had begun to take a keen interest in her daughter's developing relationship. Rather than expressing concern about cultural differences or potential dangers, she seemed genuinely pleased that Sarah had found someone who treated her with such obvious care and respect. "That young man looks at you like your father looked at me," Mary observed one evening as Sarah practiced songs on her flute. "There's something pure about it. No calculation or selfishness, just genuine affection and desire to make you happy." Sarah felt warmth spreading through her chest at her mother's words. "You really think he cares about me, not just about helping us survive?" "Child, survival help would be leaving supplies and disappearing. What he's doing is courtship, plain and simple. And it's beautiful courtship at that, patient, respectful, generous. You could do much worse with a white man from town." The truth of this observation struck Sarah forcefully. The few unmarried men she had met during their occasional trips to trading posts had shown nowhere near Running Wolf's consideration for her comfort and well-being. Most seemed to view women as possessions to be acquired rather than individuals to be cherished. 2 weeks into December, a severe blizzard struck their valley, bringing winds that howled like demons and snow that fell so thickly it became impossible to see more than a few feet beyond their cabin door. Sarah worried desperately about Running Wolf's safety, knowing he was somewhere in the wilderness during the worst storm she had ever experienced. On the third day of the blizzard, when the wind finally began to subside, Sarah heard sounds that made her heart leap with relief. Someone was moving around outside their cabin, and through the frost-covered window, she could see a tall figure breaking a path through the deep snow drifts that had accumulated around their door. When she opened the door, she found Running Wolf working methodically to clear access to their cabin. He was covered in snow and obviously exhausted from fighting the storm, but his face lit up with joy when he saw her safe and warm. Behind him, she could see that he had somehow managed to bring fresh firewood and what appeared to be additional food supplies. "You came through that storm to check on us?" Sarah asked, though she knew he wouldn't understand all the words. Running Wolf nodded gravely and made gestures that indicated he had been worried about their safety during the severe weather. He had risked his own life to ensure they had enough fuel and food to survive the extended cold period that would follow such a blizzard. Mary appeared behind Sarah, wrapped in her buffalo hide coat and looking better than she had in months. When she saw Running Wolf's exhausted condition, she immediately invited him inside with gestures and broken English words he had learned during previous visits. "Come in, warm yourself," she said, pointing toward their fire. "You helped us, now we help you." It was the first time Running Wolf had entered their cabin, and Sarah felt nervous about this new level of intimacy. Having him in their private space felt both natural and momentous, a step toward something deeper than their outdoor meetings could provide. Running Wolf looked around their simple home with obvious interest, taking in the careful organization that had allowed two women to survive in such basic conditions. His expression showed respect for their resourcefulness rather than pity for their poverty, which Sarah appreciated more than she could have explained. Mary insisted on preparing tea for all three of them, using some of the herbs Running Wolf had provided mixed with their dwindling supply of actual tea leaves. As they sat around the small fire, sharing the warm drink and the heat from their stove, Sarah felt a sense of family she hadn't experienced since her father's death. Running Wolf stayed until the storm completely passed, sleeping in his buffalo robes near the fire while the women shared their small bed. His presence transformed their cabin from shelter into a home, providing not just physical protection, but emotional comfort that neither woman had realized they needed so desperately. During the long hours when the wind made conversation impossible, Running Wolf carved small wooden figures by the firelight, animals and birds with intricate details that showed remarkable artistic skill. He gave these carvings to Sarah and Mary as gifts, creating a collection of beautiful objects that brightened their sparse living space. When the weather finally cleared, Running Wolf helped them dig out from the massive snow accumulation and ensured they had everything necessary for the cold days that would follow. But before he left, he did something that took Sarah's breath away. He asked her, in his careful English mixed with gestures, if she would like to see his home. The invitation represented a dramatic escalation in their relationship. Visiting Running Wolf's camp would mean meeting his people, declaring her interest in him publicly, and potentially committing herself to a future she still couldn't fully envision. It was also dangerous. White women who entered Comanche camps, even voluntarily, sometimes never returned to their former lives. Sarah looked toward her mother, seeking guidance about this momentous decision. Mary smiled encouragingly and nodded slightly, indicating she supported whatever choice her daughter wanted to make. "Yes," Sarah said quietly, the single word carrying more weight than any marriage proposal she might have received in more conventional circumstances. Running Wolf's face transformed with joy, and he made gestures indicating that the visit would happen soon, when travel conditions improved and her mother felt strong enough to be left alone for a day or two. After he left, Sarah and Mary spent hours discussing the implications of this new development. Visiting Running Wolf's people would be stepping into a world completely different from anything Sarah had known, with customs and expectations she could barely imagine. "Are you certain about this, dear one?" Mary asked as they prepared for sleep that night. "I'm not certain about anything, Mama, but I'm certain that I care about him, and I want to understand his world better. Maybe that's enough to start with." Mary nodded approvingly. "Your father and I started with much less certainty than that, and we built a good life together. Sometimes love requires leaping into the unknown with faith that you'll figure out how to fly on the way down." 3 days later, Running Wolf returned with a horse, a beautiful painted mare with intelligent eyes and gentle manners. He explained, through their improving communication, that the animal was trained for riding by women and that he would teach Sarah how to handle her properly. Learning to ride was both exhilarating and terrifying for someone who had never been on horseback before. Running Wolf proved to be a patient teacher, supporting Sarah until she felt secure and gradually allowing her to control the mare independently. By the end of her first lesson, she was walking the horse around their meadow with confidence, though anything faster than a walk still felt impossibly dangerous. "She's yours," Running Wolf said in careful English when the lesson ended. "For visiting for freedom." Sarah stared at him in amazement. A horse represented wealth beyond anything she had imagined owning. Transportation, independence, and status that could transform her life completely. The gift was so valuable that accepting it would create obligations she might never be able to repay. "I can't take this," she protested, though part of her longed to accept the magnificent animal. Running Wolf made gestures that seemed to indicate the horse was necessary for what he had planned, not optional. If Sarah was going to visit his people, She would need reliable transportation that would also demonstrate her importance to anyone who saw her arrive. "She needs you," he said simply. "You need her." Good together. Mary emerged from the cabin to examine the mare and immediately understood the significance of the gift. "He's not just giving you a horse, dear. He's giving you equality. Among his people, a woman with her own horse has status and respect that walking women don't possess." This interpretation made Sarah more comfortable with accepting such valuable property. If the mare was necessary for maintaining dignity during her visit to Running Wolf's camp, then keeping her became practical rather than merely acquisitive. Over the following days, Sarah practiced riding until she felt secure enough for longer journeys. Running Wolf continued to provide instruction, but he also began teaching her other skills she would need: how to read weather signs, how to navigate by landmarks, how to communicate basic needs in Comanche. Most importantly, he began to explain the customs she would need to understand when meeting his people. Gift-giving protocols, respectful behavior toward elders, appropriate interaction with other warriors, all the social rules that could mean the difference between acceptance and rejection in his community. "My people curious about you," he told her one afternoon as they practiced riding together. "White woman who lives alone, who survives winter, who learns our ways. They want to see this person." Sarah felt a flutter of nervous anticipation at the thought of being evaluated by an entire Comanche band. Would they see her as Running Wolf did, or would they view her as an unwelcome intrusion into their world? "What if they don't like me?" she asked. Running Wolf considered this question seriously before answering. "They will see how I see you, strong woman, good heart, worthy of respect. But if they do not see this, it changes nothing about how I see you." His unwavering support gave Sarah courage to face whatever reception might await her. Even if his people rejected her completely, she would still have the knowledge that someone valued her exactly as she was, without requiring her to become something different. The night before they planned to make the journey to Running Wolf's camp, Sarah lay awake listening to winter wind rattling their cabin walls and wondering what the next day would bring. She was about to enter a world where everything familiar would be stripped away, leaving her dependent on trust in a man she had known for less than 3 months. But when she thought about that man, his gentleness with her mother, his patient teaching, his obvious joy in her company, her fears began to recede. Running Wolf had proven his character through consistent actions rather than mere words. If his people were anything like him, she had nothing to worry about. And if they weren't like him, she would deal with that challenge when she came to it. For now, she was content to rest in the warm security of her buffalo hides, preparing for an adventure that might change her life forever, but felt more like coming home than leaving it. The journey to Running Wolf's camp took them through country Sarah had never seen before, following ancient trails that wound between hills and across valleys where buffalo had once grazed in vast herds. Riding beside him on her painted mare, Sarah felt like she was entering a different world entirely, one where the harsh realities of frontier survival were transformed into something approaching magic. Running Wolf proved to be an excellent traveling companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the land they crossed. His English had improved dramatically during their weeks together, though he still struggled with complex ideas and often resorted to gestures to supplement his words. Sarah found their conversations fascinating despite their limitations, offering glimpses into a way of life completely different from anything she had known. They stopped frequently to rest the horses and to allow Sarah time to adjust to extended riding, which used muscles she hadn't known she possessed. During these breaks, Running Wolf continued her education in Comanche customs, explaining the social structure she would encounter and the expectations that would govern her behavior. "My father is medicine man," he told her as they shared dried meat and water beside a small stream. Very important in band. His opinion carries much weight with others. Sarah felt nervous at the prospect of meeting such a significant figure. What should I do when I meet him? How should I behave? Show respect, but not fear, Running Wolf advised. He will test you, see if you have strength to be Comanche woman. If you show weak, he will not approve. The idea of being tested filled Sarah with anxiety, though she tried not to let it show. What kind of tests might a Comanche medicine man devise for a white woman who wanted to join his people? The possibilities seemed both endless and terrifying. What if I fail his tests? Running Wolf reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. You will not fail. You have survived winter alone, cared for sick mother, learned new ways quickly. You have all strength needed. His confidence in her abilities helped calm Sarah's nerves, though she still felt apprehensive about the reception awaiting them. She had heard so many stories about hostile Indians and the fate of white captives that her imagination conjured worst-case scenarios despite Running Wolf's reassurances. Late in the afternoon, they crested a hill, and Sarah got her first view of the Comanche camp spread across a sheltered valley below. Dozens of buffalo-hide teepees formed a rough circle around a central area where horses grazed and children played. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and she could see people moving between the structures going about their daily activities. The scene looked peaceful and domestic rather than threatening, more like a village than a war camp. Sarah felt some of her anxiety ease as she watched children running and laughing, women tending fires, and men caring for horses, activities that seemed universal regardless of culture. "My people," Running Wolf said simply, pride evident in his voice. As they descended toward the camp, Sarah became aware that their approach had been noticed. People emerged from teepees to watch the visitors, and she could see discussions taking place as word spread about Running Wolf's return with a white woman. The attention made her acutely self-conscious, though she tried to maintain the dignified posture Running Wolf had taught her. They were met at the edge of camp by a group of warriors, including an older man whose bearing and elaborate clothing marked him as someone of importance. Running Wolf dismounted and spoke with these men in rapid Comanche, occasionally gesturing toward Sarah in ways that seemed respectful rather than possessive. After several minutes of discussion, the older man approached Sarah's horse and looked up at her with intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate everything about her in a single glance. He spoke a few words in Comanche, and Running Wolf translated. "Chief Mountain Bear says welcome to our camp. He says you ride like Comanche woman, not like white woman who fears horses." Sarah felt a flush of pride at the compliment. The hours of practice with her mare had been worth the effort if they helped her make a good first impression. She dismounted as gracefully as possible and stood beside her horse, uncertain about proper protocol. Running Wolf quickly moved to her side and made formal introductions, first to Chief Mountain Bear and then to several other important men who had gathered to meet her. The reception was more ceremonial than Sarah had expected, with speeches in Comanche that Running Wolf translated in abbreviated form. The general message seemed to be that she was welcome as Running Wolf's guest, but that her presence created unusual circumstances that would require careful consideration. "They want to see if you can live as we live," Running Wolf explained as they were escorted deeper into the camp. "Not just visit, but truly live like Comanche woman." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What does that mean exactly? Work with women, learn their ways, show you can contribute to band rather than being burdened. If you succeed, you can choose to stay or return to your cabin. If you fail, he shrugged, you return to your cabin anyway, but without possibility of coming back. The stakes of her visit were higher than Sarah had realized, but she found herself excited rather than intimidated by the challenge. She had proven her ability to survive harsh conditions and adapt to new circumstances. How different could Comanche life be from the frontier existence she already knew? She was assigned to stay with Running Wolf's aunt, a middle-aged woman named Singing Bird who spoke a few words of English and seemed amused by the novelty of having a white guest. The teepee was larger and more comfortable than Sarah had expected, with beautifully decorated buffalo hide walls and sleeping areas arranged around a central fire pit. Singing Bird wasted no time in beginning Sarah's education, starting with proper care and decoration of clothing. The buckskin dress Sarah had been wearing was adequate, but plain by Comanche standards. Within hours, she was learning to add beadwork and fringe that would mark her as someone who took pride in her appearance and skills. The work was intricate and time-consuming, requiring patience and attention to detail that challenged Sarah's abilities. But she found the process meditative and satisfying, creating beauty from simple materials in ways that reminded her of her mother's quilting back in their cabin. "Good hands," Singing Bird observed in her limited English, examining Sarah's first attempts at beadwork. "You learn quick." Other women began visiting throughout the evening, curious about the white woman who had arrived with Running Wolf. Their questions, translated through Singing Bird or expressed in gestures, covered everything from Sarah's family background to her relationship with Running Wolf to her intentions regarding their band. Sarah tried to answer honestly, while being careful not to make commitments she wasn't prepared to keep. Yes, she cared deeply for Running Wolf. No, she hadn't decided whether to abandon her previous life permanently. Yes, she was willing to learn Comanche ways and contribute to the community. The conversations continued late into the night, giving Sarah insight into the complex social dynamics of the band. Women held more power and independence than she had expected, with their own councils and decision-making processes that operated parallel to the men's leadership structure. Most importantly, she learned that her situation wasn't entirely unique. Several other women in the camp had come from different tribes or backgrounds, adapting to Comanche life through marriage or adoption. The band seemed accustomed to integrating newcomers, though the expectations for successful integration were clearly demanding. Sarah fell asleep that night on a comfortable bed of buffalo robes, lulled by the sounds of camp life settling into quiet and feeling more optimistic about her prospects than she had dared hope. The people she had met seemed genuinely kind rather than hostile, curious about her rather than suspicious, willing to give her opportunities to prove herself. Her first full day in camp began before dawn, with Singing Bird waking her to help with morning tasks. Sarah learned to tend the fire properly, to prepare food according to Comanche preferences, and to care for the horses that were such an important part of daily life. Each task was performed according to specific customs that had been developed over generations of nomadic living. Sarah found herself impressed by the efficiency and sophistication of these methods, which often accomplished necessary work with less effort than the approaches she had learned as a frontier settler. By mid-morning, she was working alongside other women to prepare hides for winter clothing, learning techniques for tanning, and softening buffalo leather that produced results far superior to anything she had managed on her own. The work was physically demanding but satisfying, creating useful goods through skilled labor and cooperation. Running Wolf appeared periodically throughout the day, checking on her progress and offering encouragement. But he was careful not to interfere with her integration process, understanding that her acceptance by the women was something she needed to earn independently. "How is she doing?" Sarah overheard him ask Singing Bird in English during one of these visits. "She learns fast, works hard, shows respect," his aunt replied. "But we will see how she handles difficulties. Easy times test, nothing important." Sarah wondered what difficulties Singing Bird had in mind, but she didn't have to wait long to find out. That afternoon, a group of warriors returned from hunting with a deer that needed to be processed immediately to prevent spoilage. Sarah found herself assigned to help with butchering, work that was considered essential for any woman who wanted to contribute meaningfully to camp life. The process was far more complex than Sarah had expected, involving precise cuts and careful preservation techniques that would maximize the value of every part of the animal. She had helped her father dress game occasionally, but never at this level of detail and efficiency. Working under the guidance of experienced women, Sarah learned to separate meat, prepare organs for cooking, clean hide for tanning, and even save bones that would be used for tools. The work was bloody and physically challenging, testing both her skills and her stomach's tolerance for unpleasant tasks. By evening, she was exhausted but proud of her contributions to the day's work. The women she had worked with seemed pleased with her efforts, and several made comments that Singing Bird translated as compliments about her willingness to tackle difficult jobs without complaint. "You did well today," Running Wolf told her as they shared the evening meal around Singing Bird's fire. "The women are saying you have the hands and heart of someone who can learn their ways." Sarah felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words. "It's different from anything I've done before, but I like it. There's something satisfying about working together with other women, sharing the tasks and the knowledge." Running Wolf nodded approvingly. "Comanche women, very strong, very skilled. If they accept you, you will learn much from them." Over the following days, Sarah's education continued with increasing complexity. She learned to ride in the Comanche style, using techniques that allowed for greater speed and agility than anything she had imagined possible. She practiced with bow and arrow, discovering a natural aptitude that surprised both herself and her instructors. Most importantly, she began to understand the spiritual beliefs that guided Comanche life, learning about the relationship between people, animals, and the natural world that shaped every aspect of their culture. On her 5th day in camp, Sarah was summoned to meet with Running Wolf's father, the medicine man whose approval she needed to remain with the band. She approached his teepee with nervous anticipation, uncertain what kind of test or interview awaited her. Gray Eagle was an imposing man despite his advanced age, with silver hair worn in traditional braids and eyes that seemed to see through to her soul. He gestured for her to sit across from him beside a small fire, then studied her in silence for what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his English was much better than Sarah had expected, suggesting he had more contact with white culture than most of his people. "My son tells me you wish to join our band," he said without preamble. "Why should we accept a white woman who knows nothing of our ways?" Sarah had prepared for this question during her days in camp, but Gray Eagle's directness still caught her off guard. She took a deep breath and tried to formulate an answer that would demonstrate both her sincerity and her understanding of what membership in their community would require. "I don't know if I can answer that question in a way that will satisfy you," she said honestly. "I can only tell you what I've learned about myself since meeting your son. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, more adaptable than I believed, and capable of finding happiness in ways I never expected. Your people have shown me kindness when they had no obligation to help me, and I want to contribute something valuable in return." Gray Eagle nodded slowly, his expression giving away nothing about his reaction to her words. "Kindness is not enough reason to change your entire life. What do you seek here that you cannot find in the white world?" This question struck closer to the heart of Sarah's motivations, forcing her to examine feelings she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. "I seek belonging," she said quietly. "In the white world, I am a woman alone, dependent on others for protection and survival. Here, I see women who are valued for their skills and contributions, who have voices in important decisions, who are partners rather than possessions. I see a community where strength comes from working together rather than competing against each other. And my son? What role does he play in these desires?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but met Gray Eagle's penetrating gaze directly. "Running Wolf showed me that I was worthy of care and respect even when I felt worthless. He protected me without demanding anything in return, taught me without making me feel stupid, and valued my opinions even when they differed from his. I have never known a man like him, and I don't want to lose the possibility of building a life with someone who sees me as an equal." Gray Eagle was quiet for several long minutes, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Finally, he reached into a leather pouch and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft deerskin. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said, unwrapping what appeared to be a beautifully carved bone bracelet decorated with intricate symbols. "She was not born Comanche. She came to us from another tribe when she was not much older than you are now. She faced the same choice you face, abandon everything familiar to build a new life with people she barely knew." Sarah stared at the bracelet, understanding that she was being offered something far more valuable than simple jewelry. This was a family heirloom, a symbol of successful integration that represented generations of acceptance and belonging. "What happened to her?" "She became one of our most respected medicine women," Gray Eagle said with obvious pride. "Her wisdom and healing skills were sought by many bands. She lived to be 93 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren who honored her memory. But more importantly, she found happiness and purpose among people who had not been her birth family, but who became her chosen family." He held out the bracelet towards Sarah. "If you choose to stay with us, you will wear this as a symbol that you have been accepted into our lineage. But accepting it means accepting all the responsibilities that come with membership in our band. Loyalty, service, sacrifice when necessary. It means putting the welfare of our people above your own desires. It means becoming Comanche not just in name, but in heart and spirit." Sarah looked at the beautiful bracelet and felt the weight of the decision being offered to her. Accepting it would mean making a commitment she might never be able to reverse, abandoning forever the possibility of returning to white society as the woman she had been before. But as she thought about her life before meeting Running Wolf, the loneliness, the constant struggle for survival, the lack of real purpose beyond mere existence, she realized that woman no longer existed anyway. The experiences of the past months had changed her fundamentally, creating someone who no longer fit easily into the limited roles white society offered women. "I accept," she said quietly, extending her hand to receive the bracelet. Gray Eagle placed it carefully on her wrist, adjusting the leather ties to ensure a proper fit. Then You are no longer Sarah Mackenzie, white woman alone in the world. You are Winter Flower, member of our band, daughter of our family, sister to our women, and wife to my son if that is what you both choose. The formal nature of the declaration made Sarah's heart race with a mixture of excitement and terror. She had just made perhaps the most significant decision of her life, committing herself to a future she couldn't fully envision with people she was only beginning to understand. "What about my mother?" she asked suddenly, remembering Mary's continued recovery and her need for care. "Your mother will always be welcome among us," Gray Eagle replied. "When she is strong enough to travel, she can join us if she chooses. If she prefers to remain in her cabin, we will ensure she has protection and supplies. You are not abandoning her by choosing to join us. You are gaining the resources to care for her properly." Relief flooded through Sarah at this assurance. She had been prepared to sacrifice her relationship with Running Wolf to ensure her mother's welfare, but apparently that choice wouldn't be necessary. The ceremony was completed with rituals Sarah didn't fully understand, but participated in with as much sincerity as she could manage. Singing Bird and the other women welcomed her officially into their circle, while the men performed songs and ceremonies that formally recognized her new status. Running Wolf's joy at the outcome was evident despite his attempts to maintain appropriate dignity during the formal proceedings. When the ceremonies finally concluded and they had a chance for private conversation, his happiness transformed his usually serious expression into something radiant. "You are truly mine now," he said, taking her hands in his. "And I am truly yours. No one can separate us or question our bond." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes at the simple sincerity of his words. After months of uncertainty and gradual courtship, they were finally free to acknowledge the depth of their feelings without reservation. "Are you certain this is what you want?" she asked, needing final reassurance before allowing herself to fully embrace their new relationship. "A wife who knows so little about your ways, who will make mistakes, and need constant teaching." Running Wolf cupped her face in his gentle hands, his dark eyes serious but warm. "I want a wife who has the courage to learn new ways, who cares enough about our future to make such changes. I want a woman who saved her mother's life through determination, who survived alone when most would have died, who chose love over fear even when it meant risking everything familiar." Their first kiss was tentative and sweet, filled with all the patience and growing affection that had marked their courtship. Sarah felt something settle in a place in her heart, a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. As winter deepened around the Comanche camp, Sarah began her new life with enthusiasm and determination. She learned rapidly, adapting to customs and expectations with the same resilience that had allowed her to survive frontier hardships. The women accepted her fully once Gray Eagle's approval was announced, sharing their knowledge and including her in their decision-making processes. Most importantly, she and Running Wolf settled into a partnership that exceeded her most optimistic expectations. He proved to be a husband who valued her opinions, shared domestic responsibilities, and treated her as an equal partner in all aspects of their life together. When spring arrived and travel became easier, they made the journey back to Sarah's cabin to collect Mary and help her decide about her future. They found her completely recovered, strong enough to maintain the homestead independently, but eager to meet the people who had become her daughter's new family. Mary chose to spend part of each year with the Comanche band and part at her cabin, creating a bridge between two worlds that enriched both communities. She brought knowledge of white culture and customs that proved valuable in trading relationships, while learning healing techniques and spiritual practices that enhanced her own understanding of life's deeper meanings. Years later, as Sarah watched her own children playing with their Comanche cousins in the same valley where she had once carried water alone each day for her dying mother, she reflected on the chain of events that had brought her to this unexpected happiness. A silent warrior's decision to follow a struggling young woman home had changed everything, transforming isolation into belonging, survival into prosperity, and loneliness into love. The water bucket she had carried so faithfully during those desperate months now sat in a place of honor in her teepee, a reminder of the journey that had brought her home to a family and community she had never imagined possible. Sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as strangers in the wilderness, offering help when it was needed most, and opening doors to futures that exceeded every dream. Sarah Mackenzie had carried water alone, but Winterflower would never carry any burden by herself again. She had found her people, her purpose, and her place in a world that had room for anyone brave enough to embrace the unknown and wise enough to recognize love regardless of its unexpected form.